Hello, my name's David Hay, and today I'm here to talk about geography registration and voting. Ballots onward. For the last 30-some years, I have been living in Houston, Texas, which is where I'm coming from you tonight. But I had a much longer history before that. Indeed, I was I'm probably older than most of you. I was indeed born in the first half of the last century, specifically the year 1947, in a small town in western Colorado. It was noteworthy for the fact that while they had only 20,000 people, it was the largest such municipality for 260 miles for any direction. While I was being born in western Colorado, the transistor was being invented in Holmdel, New Jersey, and a fellow named Peter Chen was being born in China. We'll hear more about him in a little bit. Western Colorado is a lovely place, quite insulated from the trials and tribulations of the outside world. My knowledge of the outside world was pretty much limited to what I could learn from newspapers, magazines, the public library, and the occasional James Bond movie. I was 18 years old before I actually ventured into the outside world. In 1965, I took my first airplane ride. And 3 hours later, I found myself in the middle of Los Angeles International Airport at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, trying to find my way to college. Pretty much the rest of my life has been spent recovering from that afternoon. Now, mind you, if you're going to venture into the outside world, you can't be doing it in Southern California in the second half of the 1960s. I may have adjusted, however, because 4 years later, when I graduated, most obvious thing to do was to get married on Saturday, graduate from college on Sunday, and set out on Monday hitchhiking to find my way to New York City. Now, like a lot of people, I arrived in New York with no job, no money, no experience, in my case, a degree in philosophy. This is kind of a hard way to go. I spent the first 2 days being quite discouraged, but on the third day, you should know that I learned part 3 of how to be successful in life. Parts 1 and 2, of course, are if you have a talent, be sure to take advantage of it. And secondly, be prepared to work incredibly hard for all of your life. But part 3, as the secret to success, is be sure you've got a good dollop of dumb luck. That and plenty of kindness of strangers. I was sitting in the coffee shop being discouraged, not sure what I was going to do the rest of the week, or for the rest of my life, when a fellow named Homer Cates had cracked up his Mercedes out on 49th Street, and he was in the coffee shop, and he was in the bad news as well. And we got to talking. He discovered that very deep in my philosophy education, I learned how to program in Fortran. This is useful. Now, mind you, my experience with computers in college was not entirely salutary. I had an unfortunate experience with some punch cards. But anyway, what he was offering was a brand new technology. It was only out for about a year, called computer time sharing. And what this allowed you to do was to enter your computer program on a teletype machine. You could see the text of it right there on the piece of paper. Thanks to the wonders of Ma Bell, it would be whisked out to Long Island somewhere, where a computer there would compile it, run it, and produce output, which it sent back, whisked back to the same teletype machine. You have to understand that back in those days, the definition of whisk meant 100, counted 100 bits per second. Think of a bit as a nano gigabit. But anyway, it worked, and I was able to deal with this. It's put me as a salesman, which is not my greatest experience, with a technology that nobody understood, including me. In the world of business, which I certainly didn't understand, in the city of New York, which is brand new to me. So this was a great opportunity, as they call it, and it was sort of touch and go. But after a year, I met some people in a small consulting company, and they hired me to develop some programs in Fortran, specifically to serve the likes of Lever Brothers, and General Foods. This was in the areas of marketing and market research. This is where I learned that there were better ways to organize data and worse ways to organize data. I believe I am the one who invented the first data warehouse, where I had a program that generated reports for their finished products, organized by part of the country, by quarter, by product group. And they would say, I want to know more about this actual store. And we do that. Or I really want to know about this product itself. Okay, we can do that. Or we want to do it by month. Okay, we can do that as well. And they had different kinds of reports depending on how kind of detail they wanted to go into. And I was, I believe, the first one to use the term dimension. Sure, lots of people came up with it later, but I was the first. I did not use the word drill down, but of course that's what I was doing. I got my MBA, and my first job after that was in Pfizer, and I delved into the wonderful world of manufacturing. This particularly was something called Material Requirements Planning, or MRP. This was a very clever bit of software that would take a sales forecast of finished products, say, by month, and using descriptions of the structure of each of those products, would come up with procurement plans for their components, whether it's raw materials or spare parts. And this was a very clever piece of software, and my clients thought that was great. There was only one problem. At each level, it was necessary to compare the requirements with the current inventory. Well, inventory was a tougher deal because in order to get proper inventory data, you had to organize and be set up to do that. It turns out way back in the early 1970s, the problem of data quality was an issue. And so as far back as that, I came to discover that the management of data is actually more difficult and more interesting than the management of software. Now, I mentioned the business of organizing data in different ways. Actually, in 1971, it was Ted Codd that came up with the assertion that you're best off if you organize data in simple two-dimensional tables, being connected with logic, not with program code. And this was fine, but it really wasn't very practical until 5 years later when Oracle and several other companies come up with a way of producing commercial products that would allow you to do all of that. You should note also that in 1976, Peter Chen, remember he's the guy that was born in 1947, came up with a way of drawing pictures of those relational structures. Now, his pictures were very elegant, but unfortunately fairly convoluted, and it was sort of hard to present them to your audience. But various other people took other approaches, and then 10 years later, I encountered with Oracle Corporation this approach, which was developed by a couple of Brits in the mid-1980s, which was much more presentable and much more accessible to the people who had to validate these things. And it's this kind of drawing that we're going to talk about here today. More recently, 32 years ago that is, I moved to Houston. And since then, I've been using drawings of both data structure and data flows to help enterprises improve the quality of their data. Specifically, accuracy, currency, completeness, clarity, and so forth. 27 years ago, I created a consulting company, Essential Strategies Incorporated, that served clients with strategic planning, requirements analysis, and perhaps to a lesser degree, system design. It served many enterprises and government agencies in a wide range of industries around the world. For the last 6 years, I have been a deputy voter registrar. Here I'm going to be the subject area expert of tonight's conversation. I was the fellow who wandered around shopping malls with my forms, getting people to register to vote. Then for 4 years now, I have been an election judge, which is to say responsible for the running of specific polling areas, as I am indeed this year, coming up on November 8th, 2022. Now about data quality, I mentioned data quality earlier. Over the past 50 years, both commercial enterprises and government agencies have come to recognize that data quality is both important and hard to achieve. It's important because it turns out where data appear to be just stuff that drags onto programs, it actually in its own right constitutes an asset to an organization that's very much as important as money, physical infrastructure, or human resources. That is, it's an asset that requires investment, it requires management, it requires paying attention to. It's hard to achieve because data are abstract, not like, tangible stuff like buildings or people or even money for that matter. Hence, managing data quality is tricky. It requires establishing a discipline for governing the data. Plus, it also requires clear models of the structure of the data involved to make sure everyone understands just what they're working with. How elections are conducted. Elections are by definition all data. There's nothing tangible here. Perfect example of an abstract subject. Registration data, that is, the people that are registered to vote, must be correct and secure. Election results must also be correct and secure, as well as being captured anonymously. Oh yeah, conduct of elections is via a complex overlap of geographical areas. Now, today I'm going to talk about a conceptual data model. This is a representation of categories of things of significance to the election process. It's in graphic form. It is not concerned with technology. It does also represent assertions about how these categories are related to each other. Now, today's model is derived from my experience with Harris County, approximately the city of Houston in Texas. Because it's based on the underlying structural concepts of the issue, it should apply to any American county. In Harris, we have adjacent counties, Fort Bend and Montgomery and Waller. Or further out, we have Brexit County, which is San Antonio, Travis County, which is Austin, and so on. For that matter, even outside Texas, it probably applies to Mesa County in Colorado and USA. Conceptual model, because it is not based on underlying technology, it supports both previous Harris County registration and voting machines and the new use of paper ballots. Here's our previous registration iPads, and here's the hot new technology with paper ballots. Now, for Harris County elections, for this particular data model, you should understand that your presenter, that is to say, yours truly, has experience with creating coherent and understandable data models. Okay, I wrote some books on the subject. In 1995, my first book, Data Model Patterns, Conventions of Thought, turned out to be the first book in the industry that described standard pictures of standard business situations. It had covered, maybe a dozen or so basic structures. Then 7 years later, in 2011, my update of that included those situations plus a lot more detailed ones, up to including models of individual industries like banking or, yes indeed, even the oil industry. Now, as I say, I'm also a subject matter expert because I've been registering voters for many years now. Now, I would like to think that my experience with modeling gave me a startup to preparing these models, but also understand that the correctness of the assertions presented here was dependent on the people who actually do the work. That is, I passed it by the civil servants who carry out the organization and running of the elections to make sure that each statement that's made here is true, at least about Harris County. Now, Harris County elections I'm going to cover this in the following categories. First, we're going to talk about geopolitical locations. The county is divided up into 1,012 individual precincts, which is how the voting is organized. And these collections of them form things like congressional districts, legislative districts, state senate districts, and so on. Now, a voter's address is what's required to put that voter in a precinct, which in turn will give you the voting districts that that voter is in. We're going to talk about that. Then, getting down to the voter registration process itself, how do we set people up to vote? Positions and measures, these are races, if you will, and measures. What and who are on the ballot? The ballots themselves. We're going to talk about a ballot template, the structure of a generic ballot. The election, which is the votes themselves. And then at the end, we'll do a little tinkering to add political parties. And finally, if we have time, we'll take a little bit of time to talk about the technology that actually was introduced to Harris County in 2022, which sort of verifies that everything we're talking to is in fact the case. Okay, now geopolitical locations. Geographic areas, first of all, just a general concept of geographic area. There are people in Harris County that are responsible for keeping track of boundaries, the precincts, how they form into congressional districts, how they form into state representative districts and state senate districts, judicial districts, county commissioner districts, and so on. These are people that come up with these boundaries. Having done so, they use a geographic software to capture them and put them into a database. This is for where you maintain the data which describe the maps. You've heard the term gerrymander. Well, it originated in Massachusetts back in the 18th century, in the 19th century rather. The term gerrymandering is named after an American politician named Elbridge Gerry, who was governor of Massachusetts, was responsible for a bill that created a partisan district in the Boston area. This was compared to the shape of a mythological salamander. Here you have Eldridge's original gerrymander around the city of Boston. And there you have a rather gruesome-looking thing. Well, compare that with the Texas version. Understand that in the last 10 years, Texas population grew phenomenally, and so we took 2 congressional districts from places like New York and Illinois. This is one of the new congressional districts. Looks a little like a cartoon character. And this starts it's from a little outside the center of Houston, extends some 40 miles to the outer loop. Here's I-10 freeway, which from here goes out all the way to Santa Monica. Here is the inner loop, Interstate 610. The next loop is the Sam Houston Tollway, and then the outer loop, here's Highway 290 is the road to Austin, and then the outer loop is called the Grand Parkway. As I said, from downtown to the Grand Parkway, you're talking about 40 miles. And then precinct 443 is a little bit that's right in here, and we're going to learn more about that precinct in a moment. First, here you have a collection, the patchwork of precincts in this part of Texas. Again, here's the Katy Freeway, here's Loop 610, and here's Highway 290, and right there is precinct 443, whose boundaries happen to correspond to something called Hilshire Village, which is a municipality independent of the city of Houston, just like several of these villages are independent of the city of Houston, which were formed back in the early parts of the 20th century from people who are trying to get out of the city. And these are nice, bucolic, tree-lined streets that are away from the hustle and bustle of downtown Houston. But unbeknownst to them, in the years, Houston has grown much around them. And they're still independent, but not the same. Anyway, we're going to talk about this precinct, but first I want to give you a bit of a conceptual model. Conceptual model is made up of categories, each represented by a round corner rectangle. Now here's a super category, which is geopolitical area, And here are subcategories of precinct, county, state, country, and so on in between. Geopolitical area is a geographic area whose boundaries are defined by state or federal laws. The county is a good example of a geopolitical area, and here you have an example of a county, specifically Harris County. And here you have I-10 and 610 and the Parkway and so on. Each white box here is a defined geopolitical area, county, state, and so on. Now, the boundaries of city, state, and county are defined by the federal government, and country are defined by the federal government. County, U.S. Congressional District, State Representative District, State Senatorial District are defined by the state government. Precincts are defined by the county government. Now you'll note there are lines connecting these to each other. A line with funny symbols and bits of text. The syntax of these lines is very rigorously defined. It was defined by those two Brits I was telling you about, Harry Ellis and Richard Barker. They defined this whole system of modeling. And they're defined so that even though it looks like schematics, they in fact represent perfectly reasonable English language sentences. Here, for example, each precinct must be, because it's a solid line there, part of the first relationship name, one and only one, because there's no funny symbol there, county. And sure enough, each precinct must be part of one and only one county, for example, Harris County. Going the other way, each county may be, because it's a dashed line, composed of one or more, because there's a little crow's foot symbol. And lo and behold, there you have the sentence. Each county may be composed of one or more precincts. Now, even though that looks very formidable as a notation, these sentences you can present to the subject area experts and say, is this in fact a true statement? Is it true that each precinct must be part of one and only one county? Can you have a precinct that doesn't have a county? Well, no, because you wouldn't find it if there was no county. Can it be one or more counties? Well, that's unlikely. To have a precinct that is both Harris County and Montgomery County? No. The whole way we're trying to run these things demands that it be in one and only one county. Can you have a county without precincts? We're going to say that's theoretically possible, but it isn't really meaningful for our example. Now, we can use the same notation to get exactly the same kinds of sentences going across the drawing. Each county must be part of one and only one state, for example, Texas. Each state may be composed of one or more counties, which is Harris and Montgomery and Fort Bend. These are all counties in the state of Texas. Similarly, each state must be a part of one and only one country. In this case, it's the USA. And going the other way, each country may be composed of one or more states, Texas and Indiana and Illinois, and so on. Now, there's a transitive feature here that each precinct, because it must be part of the county of Harris, and that must be part of the state of Texas, and that must be part of the country of USA, each precinct, by definition, must be part of the country of USA. Now, most voting districts, the Commissioner District, Congressional District, and so on, are composed of entire precincts. However, there are some, like school districts and something called municipal utility districts, or MUDs, don't ask, encompass parts of precincts only. So there's another county district that is based of sub-precincts. There's another city district that is only sub-precincts. Hence, the sub-precinct is part of a precinct, but the precinct may be composed of one or more sub-precincts. Now, the precinct structure itself there's a problem with the model that we've done so far. We know that the precinct is in a county and the county is in a state, but the state is made up of many cities. How do you know which city this precinct is part of? How do you know which other city district this subprecinct is part of? Well, the congressional district has very specific precincts. How do we know that? This model won't do it. What you need is something we're adding calling a precinct structure. This is an abstraction. There's nothing other than a link between the precincts and subprecincts and everything else. Specifically, a precinct structure is defined as the fact that a particular precinct or subprecinct, and this is the meaning, this symbol means or, one or the other, is a reference to one other geopolitical area. Now note the geopolitical area, it has multiple structures, each of which is a precinct. Each precinct has multiple structures, each of which is another geopolitical area. This is our funny modeling way of representing a many-to-many relationship. So precinct 0443 is overlapping many product structures, each of which may be one of the following. It may be reference to a single universe. It must be a reference to a U.S. Congressional District 7, or it might be a reference to State Representative District 17, or it might be a reference to State Senatorial District 135, or it might be a reference to something else. Here you have the card I got when I registered to vote. It comes back with my name and address and my birthday and my precinct number right there. It says, yes, I am indeed in Hillshire Village and I'm in School District Spring Branch ISD. And oh, by the way, because I'm in this precinct 443, I'm in Representative 7, District 7. I'm in Senate District 17. I'm in State Representative District 133. And there are other things that I'm overlapping as well. Now, here's the slide we just saw. There's a problem. That was in 2018. 2022, the effective date is 2022. Suddenly I am now in Congressional District 38. Remember District 38? And I am in State Senatorial District 138 instead of 133. So this structure has a time, is positioned in time. It was effective, say, the year 2000 and up until 2022. Okay, how do we get people to register? Start over. Okay, how do we get people registered to vote? Well, we saw the geographic maintenance for geographic data, and the geographic data is going to place the registration data, the registration data was provided by the voter. And the voter is providing basically the content for that with one exception, and that is the Secretary of State's office approves each one of these after they've been filed. Here's the voter registration form, and it's been this form for many years I've been doing it. You should know that if you're filling this out, there are two questions you have to get right or you can't continue. Are you a U.S. citizen? That has to be yes. Will you be 18 years of age before election days? That has to be yes. If you answered either of those no, throw it away. We'll come back later. But the one thing to note here is that there is a residence address. Not to be confused with the mailing address. This is the resident address, and this is going to be used to determine what precinct you're in. Now, when it comes in with an address, how do we know what precinct number it represents? Well, we happen to have an entity type called precinct street segment. We also have an entity type called precinct straight, but it's just this piece of the street that's important to us here. There's the street name, and it's the piece of the street which is from a number to another number. And if it's a boundary, it's either the odd side of the street or the even side of the street. And it may be something like East 42nd Street, or it might be 42nd Street East. These are optional things that were added to that. So with this, then you have the ability, if you have this information, of finding out what precinct you're in. You should know, by the way, that in America, we've got it easy. because if you are on a street and you want to find out the house you're looking for, you look at the numbers and they're increasing and increasing, both left and the right side, until you finally get where you're going. If you're in London, it doesn't work like that, because the way streets are numbered is it's up one side and then down the other. So if you're looking for a location, just going up the way doesn't help, because you've got to go up and come back before you can find it. So we got some things right. Okay, here is that segments entity we're talking about as a table. Hillshire Village has Westview Drive as a north boundary, Wart Road as a east boundary, the Katy Freeway is the southern boundary, and the Spring Branch Creek as the west boundary. Since the Spring Branch Creek is not a street, it doesn't concern us right now. What you have is the Katy Freeway, and it's only the north side of the Katy Freeway, which is to say the even side of the street, that concerns us, that puts us in 443. Westview, this one up here, is also a boundary, so it's only the south side, which is to say the odd side of the street, that puts us in the district, in the precinct. And Wart Road, that's only the left side that concerns us. Everything else, it's pretty much the entire street. For example, there's one called Hillshire Grove Lane, number 13. And since 13 is between 1 and 99, then this is pretty close to what we're looking for. And sure enough, there's Hillshire Grove Lane, and it's the third house on the right. And yes, it's in precinct 443. So Charlie here has come in to register to vote. Comes in, the registration form is pulled out, and it has a registration number on it, and fills out the necessary information about his address, and that will include the city, state, and zip code, which is to say, zip code is referring to an area, a postal area. And given that it's this precinct street segment, then by definition it must be either this precinct or maybe the sub-precinct. And basically that's the whole registration form. This is the form he filled out. And as I say, there's a number there. And this gives us the precinct. And it may be a sub-precinct. Okay, what's on the ballot? Now, the ballot information is not in any way connected to the voters, at least not here yet. Candidates provide information that fills the ballot template. Now, the ballot template is separated from the voter registration data. And the ballot templates, first of all, somebody has come up with the position. Somebody wants to run for, or several people want to run for congresswoman. Several people want to run for a state representative, state senator, or city mayor, or state governor. And these positions are all defined in the election office. There also are measures, things like constitutional amendments and bond issues. Now, the measures have two values, either yes or no. Positions have multiple values, each of which is a particular person that wants to hold that position. This term candidacy is the fact that a particular person is applying for a particular position. Again, many to many. A position has many candidates, person has many positions. Now, the ballot. A ballot is for the conduct of an election, and it's defined specifically for a precinct or a sub-precinct. And it consists of one or more entries. Okay, each entry is either a specific measure or a specific position. So if you have 10 entries, there are 10 positions, you have 3 measures. The Harris County ballot for this November is very long because every single judiciary position is on here, and you've got a whole bunch of judges to choose from. So a lot of candidacies. But this template is basically this ballot with these entries and the values for the descriptions of the measures, descriptions of the positions. Here you have an example from 2018, governor, lieutenant governor, senator, and representative. Governor had Gray Abbott and two contesters, the Democrat and Libertarian. Lieutenant governor had Dan Patrick and two contestants of Democrat and Libertarian. And the senator had Ted Cruz, Beto O'Rourke, and a Libertarian. And then here, John Culberson was an incumbent, had been there for a very, very long time. And he was challenged by a young woman named Lizzie Fletcher, about my kid's age, and she beat him. And just an odd story, I should tell you, she beat him. Not only did she beat him that year, but in 2020, she beat him again, which really got the Republicans really nonplussed. So in the redistricting in 2022, they basically gave her a much larger District 7 that included lots and lots of Democrats. And then a whole bunch of the other people in the district, including yours truly, wound up in that District 38 that I showed you before. And the idea was that, okay, she got ahead and she'll win the next time, but maybe another congressperson will come in. And the returns are not in. It's not. Today is only October. We have a couple of weeks. We'll find out what happens. The election, the votes themselves. All right, I described the template for the ballot. A ballot itself is a copy of that template, which is what the voter sees. So the voter will see, first of all, comes in, he wants to vote, and he gets authorized to vote. And he's voting for this election. Yes, he's registered to vote. And he's in this precinct, so that's going to give us a ballot. And the set of ballot entries is the template. But he's going to take a look at his version of that template, and he's going to choose either a result for this measure or a particular candidate for this position, and then another candidate for another position, and another candidate for another position. And oh, by the way, he may select a write-in candidate for that position. And so the template is all this stuff, and the actual data is what you see here. This is the results as entered by the voter. Now, each of these are linked to data that are here. So, the voter produces results. Political parties is simply an extra twist. If this is a primary election, it's to select candidates specifically from this political party. So there are specific candidacies, and there's a particular ballot and position from this political party. So there you are. Since this is a recording, I can't take your questions in personal, but I certainly suggest that you write to me if you've got any comments or questions, or give me a telephone call. I am retired, so I answer the phone. I'd love to hear from you. Now, this was the conceptual model. This was the theoretical structure of the election. Let's see what an actual election looks like. Harris County is completely revamped the way they do business. Up until now, the model was fed by the actual election that I did in 2018. The registration database was managed by the Harris County Tax Assessor and Voter Registrar, and it was because of that title that I was a deputy registrar. The vendors were people who ran the software, the database for the registrations, and there was particular very clever software that does the mappings and the geographic information systems. The templates and the voting equipment were all made. Some hardware that was about, 15 years out of date. This was all managed by the Harris County Clerk's Office. Now, the underlying structure we described already should endure, even though it's now managed by a single organization called the Harris County Elections Administration. There's brand new equipment by a company called Hartz InterCivic, based out of Austin. Now, from election to election, the mappings, the the various congressional districts and legislative districts are all based on legislation and census data. Registration data is captured also by the Elections Administration, but it's originally captured by deputy voter registrars like yours truly. By the way, if you would like to view your registration, you can do it on harrisvotes.com if you happen to live in Harris County. If you happen to live anywhere else in the United States, you can go to Vote 411, specify your state, specify your name and address and identifier, whether it's a driver's license or whatever have you, and they will give you whether you're registered or not. Now, in Harris County, there is e-poll books are called, which are these little iPads, which are the software that extracts the database. Now, the information about the campaign is acquired from source agencies. You know, who's running for what jobs. The hardware, it's very pretty. The duo machine, which captures the votes. The scanner reads and records the ballots. So this duo machine, you feed in a piece of paper, do your voting, it prints out the piece of paper, you go across the way, and you put that piece of paper in here, and it scans it. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Before the election, and I watched this process, there is an administration center. In this case, it's the arena at the NRG Stadium complex. There's a big football stadium. This is an arena which is near that. There's also a convention center which is near that, as well as the Astrodome itself. An army of the duo machines that were tested, and they had an army of people in there testing every single one to be sure that each duo has all the precincts, all the races, and all correctly done, and such that the machine correctly records everything that anybody would put in. Now, this is done that way because when the voter arrives, they changed the policy. First of all, they changed the policy a couple of years ago that it's no longer necessary to show up at the same place where you registered. If you show up in Harris County at a Harris County voting place, if you registered for a precinct that's in Harris County, you can give your address, and that precinct and that precinct's ballot will arrive. Which means that every single duo has to have all the data for all the precincts in that one machine. There is also a memory stick which captures this as well inside each scanner. I'll talk about that in a moment. Now, the collection of duos and scanners, along with the supply and forms and all these hardware, is delivered to each polling place. On Monday, I and my clerks get to go in and unpack it all and set it all up. As I said, you can vote at any polling place, no matter what the precinct is in your home. Now, typically, there's only one scanner in each polling place. There's lots of duos, but there's only one scanner. In larger ones, there may be two. Now, the judges and clerks on Monday prepare the site, unload and unpack the equipment, include the e-pods, which is multiple iPads, not iPhones. It looks like that. Booths, which is the duos, which I showed you before. The scanners, which is like that, except that this one, what you see, it's on top of the big box. The big box is what's going to capture all of the paper ballots when it's been scanned, plus miscellaneous forms and supplies. Tuesday, you receive voters. Each voter comes in. Do you have a driver's license? Or do you have another recognized identifier, like a passport? You check in. If you do, the registration shows up on the e-poll book. It comes up, it looks like that. Do you still live at 10th Street South? Oh, no, I moved. Well, if you moved, there's a form here. If you'll go fill out this form, come back when you filled it out, and we'll give you a provisional ballot. You have 2 weeks for the form to get adjusted, so you go in and check and see if it was cured, it's called. Oh, by the way, my name isn't Martha Van Buren, it's Martin V. Buren. Oh, well, can you testify to that? And I take a look at the picture your picture ID and I look at you, you can fill out an affidavit saying, yes, that's my name. And as a clerk, I countersign that. If you have that affidavit, then yeah, fine, go vote. If you've approved, you sign the poll book, and the clerk then displays a barcode which has encoded in it the precinct and the template ID for the ballot based on the registration address. And that barcode is scanned by the polling location controller, which then in turn produces a paper tag which is given to the voter. Note that this paper tag has nothing but the identity of the ballot. There is no information about the voter whatsoever. That's put in the machine and it brings up the correct ballot. So from then on, nothing knows anything about you. You take that to the machine, you enter in that number, and you get your selections. You enter the selections. Now, these choices are only kept temporarily in memory. When it's complete, the voter prints the entire list of choices on the ballot, and you take the printed ballot to the scanner. The scanner records the entire list of choices redundantly in 3 forms. It's in the scanner itself. There's a memory in the scanner. It's on the external V drive. And it's on paper in the bin. Once you've done that, you can go home. Ta-da! You voted. At the end of the day, a set of choices of all the voters in this polling location have been captured. The precinct results have been calculated on the V drive, so we know who won the election in this precinct. So we package up all the duos, the scanners and V drives, and boxes of ballots and supplies. The presiding judge or designated has to sign for all the above, shove them into the trunk, and head off to the Election Administration Center, in this case, the NRG Arena. All will then be signed in there. And the people there take the V drives, read them into the computers they have there, come up with the totals for the county, send those totals to Austin and release into the newspapers, and by 11 p.m. we should know. Now, there are certain protections in this system. First of all registration records are available to the internet. They're ostensibly available to the public, although you have to identify yourself, and it's read-only. You can't update the registration in that form. But as a matter of fact, when you receive your registration card, the thing I showed you before, if the address isn't correct, send it back. Get it fixed. Those dual booths and decanters are no connection to the outside world. There is no connection to the internet. The precinct number and the booth template ID to use by the voter is scanned from the iPad. So the only input to the booth is of the precinct ballot ID that you just put in. This input, it only identifies the ballot to use. By the way, cell phones are not permitted in the voter room. Voter information never goes to the voting equipment. Scanners with the data, plus the V drive with the copy of data, plus the physical ballots, are physically carried to the Election Administration Center. And once they have been processed, they're locked away, never to be seen again. Unless it's necessary for there to be an audit, and then auditors specifically go in and get the paper ballots and get electronic, can do the audit. Physical ballots are the official record of each person's vote and are not revealed to anyone. Results for each precinct are calculated on the V drive. The V drive are combined in a processor in the Election Administration Center. Ta-da! Again, if you have questions, please write or call me. Essential Strategies International at this phone number with this email address. Thank you.